Welcome to our second session about how to restore your mental health and well-being during these fast-changing times. Our program is called Innovative Thinking for Fast-Changing Times. I'm Andi Simon, and I'm so glad you're joining us. I have with us today Dr. Carl Clark, and his job is to help you begin to see, feel, and think in new ways. I'm a corporate anthropologist. That's what I do. I help organizations and the folks in them change. And Dr. Clark is going to help you today to do the same. With COVID, the pandemic, remote work, people are really feeling stressed out. The question is, do I have to? Or is there a way that I can address the tensions are there? Are they going to be lemons or lemonade? Or somebody said to me, limes or margaritas, which one would you like? How do we turn this into something you can learn from, you can manage, and you can turn yourself into somebody who's contagious with others and spread the smiles and the sense of well-being? So Dr. Carl Clark is the head of the Mental Center of Denver, a huge organization that really is working to not just help people who are acute or are finding themselves depressed or anxious, but keep them well. And I took a program with him called The Science of Well-Being. He was a client, and for us to work together, I needed to better understand that science of well-being. How do we create happiness and well-being for each of us? And the program offers some great opportunities for you as you're thinking about the world that you're in and the work that you're doing. Dr. Carl Clark has many honors, and you can read all about him at Mental Health Centers of Denver. But I just want to get right into today because we're under a lot of stress. How do we handle it? Carl, thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me, Andi.
Help
Yes,
our
it is.
listeners. It's a great time for us to share all of your wisdom. Employees, workers, self-employed professionals, help them deal with the problems that COVID has created. Your turn.
Okay. Well, it is stressful, right? The pandemic, and we've all lost things. We've lost the way we usually do stuff. And when there's loss, there's grief. And people can go through every phase of grief. The denial, the anger, the bargaining, the depression, and eventually, hopefully, getting to the point of acceptance. It's like, okay, we've got this pandemic. Now I know how to take care of myself. What are my hopes for the future in managing all of this? So I want to talk about how stress impacts us. When we're stressed, we have a physiologic reaction to it. It's actually the amygdala in our brain doing the fight or flight thing, and we would avoid this situation if we could, and we don't feel like we have any control over it. So those are the elements of stress. So the very first thing that you can do when you're feeling stressed is to acknowledge it. Stress is our body's way of telling us that there's something really important that we want to pay attention to. So acknowledge it. When you acknowledge it, the stress actually goes from your fight or flight amygdala up to your frontal lobes, where we problem solve. And the question is like, okay, why am I stressed? Okay, this important thing to me. And is there anything I can do about it? Can I get some control over it? And sometimes we can. There are lots of stresses where we can take control. Certainly when going to the grocery store at the beginning of this pandemic was a big deal, and not so big now because I know how to keep myself safe, right? Wear a mask, wash my hands, don't touch my face, those sorts of things. So we can get control over some stresses, but other stresses are things that we really don't have control over, but we still worry about, right? The hypothetical things like, what if I die during this pandemic? But what we can do is that we can say, well, if I do die, what do I want to happen? What do I want to happen for my family? And to make sure that I have those things in place. And I frankly recommend a time, a day to stress. Like pick out a time, it's like, okay, at 3:00 today, I'm going to think about my stresses, right? And it does an amazing thing for the brain. When you have a time of day where you can think about what's stressing you, you don't have to stress about it the whole day. Because
Yes.
otherwise you're always on edge about, this thing. And it's like, no, I'm going to sort through this at 3 today. And sometimes people like to do it with somebody else,
Yes.
sort of like, let's pick out 3 and talk about all these awful things that are on our minds.
Yes.
Yeah, and then let it go. So that's on the stress side. But then there are things that we can do to contribute to our well-being that are very helpful for us. That has to do with how do we increase the positive emotions in our life? How do we get highly engaged in activities where time disappears? How do we recognize the meaningful things that we're doing in our lives? How do we connect, in this time of COVID with our positive relationships? And how do we just frankly accomplish things, right?
Yes.
All of those things are a recipe for improving our well-being.
Well, the interesting part of what you're saying, though, is that you can. And this requires a sense of the individual realizing that they don't have to be responding to something, but they can begin to set aside a time for stress where they begin to discuss how they're going to deal with it and then move on. That they can get engaged in a project that begins to occupy them with some positivity as opposed to wandering. And some people have a hard time getting organized in the morning. I urge people to make a list the night before. It's a good time. You need a new list. You don't get up, get dressed, and go to the office anymore. But you also are wandering around trying to figure out what to do. And then you do your emails at 10 o'clock at night, and you're not quite sure why you're still working. You are in charge. That's unusual, and there's nobody to mimic in some fashion. So, as you're thinking about these, is whether it's professionals, entrepreneurs, employees, they need to begin to take responsibility for their day and their emotions. Is that right?
It is right. In fact, Andy, one of the things that's happened, one of the losses that we all experience was our routine. We
Yes.
lost it, right? We had a routine, we had a way that we did things. And so I highly recommend to people, it's like create your new routine, right? You're
Yes.
still working, it might be remotely, but it's like, when do I work remotely? I mean, some things can be really practical, like pick one spot in your house where you'd work remotely.
Yes.
Don't use the whole house because then you've got work everywhere, there are structural things that we can do and make a difference. And so one of the things around sort of the science of well-being is how do we increase our positive emotions?
Yes.
I'm not talking about denying when we're, worried or the bad things that happen, those happen. And at the same time, we can increase the positive emotions that we're having by doing purposeful things like a gratitude journal. Write
Yes.
down 5 things a day that you're grateful for. And it's interesting if you do that for a week. I tell people to do it a week, but I really want them to do it for a month. And then some people never stop. But the
Yes.
more things that you recognize that you're grateful for, the more you recognize, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and to start to move that balance. There's actually been a lot of studies that are looking at, the number of positive emotions versus the number of negative emotions. And if it's 1-to-1, you are not doing very well.
Yes.
So you really want like 3 positive emotions to every negative emotion, and you will be thriving.
Now, don't think that this comes out of nowhere. You can do things that create positive emotions. One of the things in the science of well-being are acts of kindness. And if you're waiting for things to be done to you, flip it and do something kind for somebody else. I don't care whether it's a child, your husband, or somebody, and you'll find yourself feeling good. Don't make it a quid pro quo. Just give with your generosity, and you'll find, wow, I feel better. It's okay to give. A lot of discussion now about how do you reach out to someone who's still out of work. And you may not have a solution for their out of work, but it's not a bad time to see how are you and just listen. You don't have to have an answer. They just need someone to talk to. There are little things, particularly now, we have such a dramatic change where 30 million people are unemployed, that there's a time for us not to abandon others, but to begin to embrace and engage with them, but softly, in a way that you can manage without, you don't have any hope for them. You may not have a job for them, but you can be kind to them. So some other things they might want to do.
Well, Andy, when people are worried about somebody, right? Sometimes it's hard to know how to start the conversation. And what I recommend to folks is to say, what happened to you? What happened to you is much different than what's wrong with you, right?
Yes.
And so when you ask somebody what happened, they might even say, "What are you talking about?" It's like, I know you. You're usually more cheerful, and you just
Yes.
haven't seemed cheerful recently. And to open that door for them
Yes.
to tell their story. Now, you don't necessarily know what to do, but you can at least let them tell the story. And
Yes.
then you can say, I don't know what to do here, but I think you should see someone.
Yeah. There's one other thing to add, and we'll wrap up. I did a podcast with a gentleman who was telling me that how the masking of the face and not seeing the smile creates problems. Remember, the masked bandit was a bad guy, and now not wearing a mask could be a bad guy or gal. And we have to begin to read our eyes and voice differently than we would have when we could see the face, because part of our communication comes through facial recognition. If I'm smiling, we're monkeys. I smile, you smile. If I can't see your smile, what will the cue be for me to know that you're a happy person at a happy moment? Do you have any thoughts? Because I've been reading a great deal about the realization how important the facial recognition is. At least on Zoom, we could see each other.
Yeah, well, and that is the upside of doing Zoom, right? Because you get to see the whole face, right? You don't have to use the mask. And only 7% of our communication is voice.
Yes.
The rest of it's body, facial movements, all those things that I think people are deeply missing because
Yes.
they're alone. And so I recommend that people engage in every way that they can. So definitely looking at the eyes make a difference. And you can actually tell if somebody's smiling, even if they've
Yes.
got a mask on, just by looking at the eyes. And the other thing is that in Zoom meetings, so I attend a lot of these meetings, but I love the fact that they have the little like chat thing. And
Yes.
so what we miss in doing things on Zoom is chatting with everybody.
It's
So
true.
I chat like I would have in a regular room. It's like,
Even
hey,
better.
so how are you doing? And it's really important to allow yourself permission to enjoy things, even in
Yes.
a time of a pandemic. And so I regularly ask people at the opening of a meeting, what's something that you've enjoyed recently?
Yes.
So interesting, the range of things that people enjoy.
I do the same, and I find it bonds people. They need a personal touch, not just a professional one. And sharing a joy, my daughter got engaged, anything that all of a sudden everyone's smiling together around something that is shared. And that really is what we're looking for. Belonging matters to humans. We don't like to live alone, even though about 25-30% of Americans now are living alone. And that's something to worry about as well. So, in wrapping up, if people would like to know about your program or how you help their company in different ways, an HR professional who may be watching us wants to know more about what you're doing, Carl, please share with them.
Yeah, well, we do offer well-being services using the science of well-being to businesses. And we go into the business and look at what that culture is, because there are different types of business cultures. People that are repairing machinery is a very different kind of business than somebody who's a lawyer, right? And so each business has its own culture. So we use human-centered design, looking at that culture and then incorporating the skills of the science of well-being so that you can create a workplace that improves the well-being of everyone that's there.
Yep.
And it is a very interesting thing. So if you have a friend whose well-being is good, it has a 15% impact on your well-being. If you have
Yes.
a friend who has a friend whose well-being is good, it has a 6% influence on your well-being. And it goes the opposite direction. The numbers aren't the same, but if you have a friend whose well-being is not good, it has a negative impact on you. So when you create a work environment where you're looking at the well-being of every person that's there, it has a ripple effect, not only in the business, but for their friends and family too.
The interesting part is that it's contagious. Humans look at others and they themselves feel your feeling. It's like your story changes my mind and I begin to have a better, different story with it. So I'm going to wrap up, but it's always profound talking to you about the kinds of things we should know about, and sometimes it's difficult to get a handle on it. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Andi. It's always great talking with you.
So for those of you who have been watching, I hope that we've offered you some ideas about how to improve your positive well-being during very fast-changing times. These are innovative thinking ideas that you may not have easy access to elsewhere. And Dr. Clark would always be delighted to share with you others. But it's a time for us to share. So if this works for you, share it away and begin to tell others about, now, if you smile, I smile. And if you are having a good day, I have, and we're both grateful for it. And you can begin to share it. And don't forget, when you have a group meeting of your virtual community, start with something that matters to them, something good to share. I find it's just a great way to realize we're people and it's not just business. And that makes it all a better business. So I thank you all for the opportunity to share with you. I'm Andi Simon. I'm a corporate anthropologist, and I help companies change. They don't like it, but we have to. So it's fun. Have a great day. Bye now.